Hi, I'm Jay, and today we're at the bench tying a very basic crappie jig. Stay tuned. So good morning. Doing something very simple today. I've had some private messages about some previous videos that I've made showing just some of the basic steps with jig tying, bucktail jigs, and there's a couple groups that are using the videos as somewhat of a teaching tool, which I think is fantastic. People are welcome to use the videos for that type of thing. So what we're doing today is I'm at the bench, and we're going to tie a very simple crappie jig. So as we get situated, let's turn on the vise, turn on my face. And in the vise, I'm going to tie a simple ball head jig. This is a 3/32 ball head. It takes the Mustad 32760. It's a size 4 hook. It's a good general purpose size. I enjoy fishing this size. I use this size jig a lot for perch, but I find that it's kind of in the middle. It's not quite a 1/4, which is probably the largest jig weight that I would use for crappie. And it most certainly is not as small as the 160. So it's a good size to practice with. And everything that we do here today, you can change the materials, you can change the size, but the basic things that we discuss here today will work perfectly in tying just a simple crappie jig. So I begin with a size 2 round nylon thread. It's unwaxed. There's nothing fancy about this thread. You can use flat threads. You can use wax threads, but those really have their own place in fly tying and aren't quite necessary for just basic jigs. I think there's a lot of crossover with fly tyers or jig tyers that are buying materials at a fly specific type shop, and we start using materials that they may work. Sometimes it's a little overkill, sometimes it doesn't quite match the technique or the type of jig that we're tying. It doesn't really match. I'm not going to go into great detail about that. I will touch on that. I have an idea for a future video. But for now, we take our size 2 thread, we walk it down towards the bend of the hook with touching wraps and stop right at the point of the hook. Now I have some generic hackle feathers. I'm going to take a couple pink and a fluorescent yellow right down the middle. So we're going to tie a fluorescent yellow body, pink head jig, very basic colors, and a very popular color, particularly for crappie jigs. So I lay the 3 feathers together with the tips lined up. You can adjust these just looking at them side by side. So now when I pinch them closer to the tips, they all kind of flatten out. Three little paddles, so to speak. And they are a little fidgety, just trying to get them so they look good together. But we're going to measure the hackles. We want the tail to be the length of the body, so the hook shank, the length of the body past the bend of the hook. I know that I am going to lock it in back here towards the hook point, so that's why I give myself a little bit of room. On my vise I have 4 markings, and I'm basically aiming for that 4th dot. I know that that's the length that I'm going to want. Switch my grip, keep this pinch nice and tight, and I'm saving these feathers. The long fibers on the lower half of these feathers actually will make some nice tail material themselves. They can be used for larger jigs. They can be used for palmering on larger jigs. So I do save them. We're going to lock the tail on. There's 3 or 4 wraps towards the bend of the hook, 3 wraps back to the other side of where I've locked it on. Just to crisscross your thread, locking it on. Now that is technically a knot, right? I'm going to walk the thread all the way down the shank of the hook and then back up just to fill in the space. There is a little bit of a step here. We are using some chenille that will be thick enough where you won't notice that. But there we are. We've walked the thread back up to the point of the hook. I use just 1 drop of head cement right on the knot itself, so that crisscrossing thread, locking it on right where the tail is locked on, that technically is a knot. So we add just a drop of cement. You can coat the whole shank of the hook. It's not necessary. Using good technique, tying things on, and using good knots, you can catch fish all day long, and that jig's going to look just fine. Now chenille, different manufacturers have different sizing. I have here a card of Netcraft. They're calling this fine chenille. And then I have an old unopened pack of Universal Vice, and they're calling it a medium chenille. And see if I can hold these up where you can see both. Not quite sure if you can tell, but they look basically the same. They look the same width. Here is a much thicker chenille. Typically you'd see this called a large. Danville has their own numbering system, just like hooks. The larger the number, the smaller the chenille. So a lot of different sizes, but what we are interested in, and I will use this pack. Which one do I like the best? I will use this pack. This, I believe, is just a plain Danville, and it's basically a medium size. So when you're buying chenille, if you find something that's medium, that will be your general purpose. If you want your chenille body to be a little bit thicker, you can overlap it to make it a little bit thicker. So medium is a good. You can use it for larger jigs, you can use it for smaller jigs. I'm just cutting off that end that had the, it must have been the part that was being held in the card, so it was missing some hair. So cut yourself a piece that's long enough to tie a couple jigs with. I begin by removing some of the fibers to expose the thread core. And I lock this on right at my knot at the base of the tail. And again, walk my thread up to the head of the jig. And my chenille is secure and locked in place. I'm going to wrap the body forward So my first full wrap around is going to be angled towards the tail, and then as I come around I change the angle more straight and perpendicular to the hook shank itself, and with touching wraps, hand over hand, I just walk it up the shank of the hook. I don't try to overlap it as you compress the wrap that you've just put on, but touching wraps, so your chenille stays full. I don't walk the chenille back to create kind of a tapered body, to give the jig shoulders, you know, kind of look like a bodybuilder. That's not what I'm trying to do. I think that technique, or that style, that practice in tying crappie jigs, I think that might have come about with the changes in hooks that guys were using with the different crappie jigs and the different molds that they were casting. So with the use of the sickle hooks, which has a much wider gap, and this is just speculation on my part, but it seems to me that as I think back over the years, the technique of or the practice of building up the shoulders on your crappie jig, I think has to do with the changes in hooks, trying to fill in that space, because now you have hooks with a little bit wider gap, which is all well and fine, but this is just the basic way to go about doing it. If you overlap your chenille, this is the basic techniques that will allow you to do that when you practice and start to be a little bit creative with your jig tying. So that was about 6 wraps, all between the vise, the jaws of the vise themselves, and my bobbin. This last wrap, I bring the chenille around the outside of my bobbin. So when I switch hands, I pick up my bobbin and I lock it into place. That is the easiest way to lock your chenille on. There's not much need to crisscross your bobbin around your chenille or wrap and switch hands. Bringing the chenille to the front of your bobbin, you're already crisscrossing it. So when you do pick up your bobbin and start your wraps, it locks that chenille into place. We could stop here with a very nice, perfectly good jig to use, but I am going to find a hackle feather that's not quite too long. Oh, over here. I set some aside. So the tips of this hackle feather are a little bit more uniform. It's a cleaner looking feather in the sense that it's not kinked or crinkled, or it's not torn or beat up in any way. And I see when I wrap this around the hook shank, these fibers extend the length of the gap of the hook about halfway past the point of the hook. So if I measure it this way, I can see that it extends past the point of the hook about half the distance of the hook gap. So I'm looking at the feather and I'm just finding the point where the barbs on the feather get a little bit longer. So I'm going to strip a short section. And again, saving those bottom pieces. I can use them for tails on smaller jigs, but this is what I got. Just a small section. A couple more wraps on the collar, just to bulk it up just a little. This is thin thread, and I didn't have much as a base. I'm going to lay the feather diagonally, and usually I always angle my feather. I point it down between the thread and the hook head, so when I lock it on, you can see that the tip of the feathers kind of sticking out towards the hook eye at the 4 o'clock. If the feathers are long enough, you can do this by hand, but I use a simple hackle tool that pinches the end of the feather so I can wrap it again between the jaws of my vise and my bobbin. 1, 2 full wraps, and then the third time around I bring it around to the outside of my bobbin, so when I switch hands I can pick this up, lock it right into place. A little bit of pressure breaks the tip off, and again I'm saving that tip, that's still a usable size. Now I'm just checking to see if there's any fibers that are pointing forward. There's 1 or 2. So I can take my thread and I'm holding it forward of the jig so the thread rides right along the head of the jig. A couple wraps helps push those fibers, straightens them back up, keeps them in place and not unruly. Now this jig is a little bit getting towards the large size, but you can still use, so this head size is getting to the size that it's a little bit big to use a whip finish tool, but that's what we'll use to finish this off. Very simply, you create your diamond, and again I'm angling that top thread that comes from the whip finish tool, so angling it so it slides right on the head of the jig, and then as I spin it around it's trapping the fibers behind it so you don't get any fibers that stick out or that are unruly. Now if I did have any pieces that were sticking out towards the eye of the hook, I can take a pair of tweezers very simply, or just, you know, small fly tying scissors, and just cut those away. But a good technique, it's a nice clean job. We finish this off very simply with lacquer based head cement, a few drops on the thread all around the head. Let's switch this over, turn that off. There we have it. Very simple crappie jig with a palmered collar. Very simple but effective jig that will catch fish all day long. We can jazz that up just a bit by adding some crystal flash along with the hackle fibers for the tail. You can change the fibers of the tail. You can use turkey feather. Looks very good. Marabou, another good choice. Or, like we mentioned, just some of those long fibers from some of those feathers, the pieces that we had left over. All make really good choices for tail material. For the body, jazz it up a bit with some crystal chenille, different color chenille, 2 colored chenille, or 2 strands of chenille braided as you're wrapping. Makes a beautiful 2-tone body. The palmered collar can be left on or tied without. Both ways will make a very good, effective jig. And I think that will do it for us today. If you have any questions on what we did, go ahead, put some comments down below. Any clubs that are using these videos, I'd love to hear from you. Put some comments down below, or check the message area. You can instant message me. I would love to hear from you. But I think that will do it for us today. As always, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any new content. Check out the website, jworthhandtied.com, which has a large selection of my jigs, flies, and streamers. And I think that'll do it. Keep tying, guys, and until next time, tie lines.